做到超的天妇罗意的。
No one in such a big supermarket, really
我也
embarrassing.
是刚
The
刚
fact that no consumption is
妇
something that
罗意的嘛，
ordinary people can feel. Even the CCP's inflated data shows that the
这
country's
个
economy has entered a vicious cycle. Weak demand, falling prices, reduced income, further decline in demand.
可能不怎么满意。
Japan, South Korea, and Western countries usually address similar economic problems by providing cash to their citizens to stimulate consumption and boost the economy. Why doesn't the CCP's government, with the world's second largest economy, learn from this mature experience? In this video, we explore the CCP's unique thinking. The Chinese are never stupid. On the contrary, they are very shrewd. On June 27th of this year, the China Macroeconomic Forum (CMF) 2026 Mid-Year Forum was held in Beijing. Usually, in similar settings, such economists would sing praises to the party. However, perhaps because China's economic problems are too severe, several current and former government advisors publicly acknowledged that the core contradiction in the current economy is strong supply, but very weak demand. They called on the authorities to introduce pragmatic policies to correct the imbalance and emphasized that addressing deflationary pressures, boosting consumption, and improving domestic demand are urgent priorities. Huang Haizhou, an advisor to the People's Bank of China, the Central Bank of China, said, "A country mired in deflation cannot achieve technological innovation." Another former advisor to the People's Bank of China, Liu Shijin, stated that weak consumer spending among Chinese people is the biggest pain point in the current economy.
就是我们现在这个虚弱已经到了一个点上了。
Our current weakness has reached an extreme point. China's economic development is once again at a turning point. The urgent task is to restore investment vitality and achieve positive investment growth. The solution is to lower the savings rate and correspondingly increase end-user demand. He said that on paper, Chinese banks appear to hold large amounts of savings, but wealth is concentrated in the hands of a small number of wealthy people. Meanwhile, the country has a large low-income group with high consumption desires but limited savings, making them hesitant to spend.
他的金葵花客户
Here, I'll just mention a statistic from China Merchants Bank's 2024 annual report. Their golden sunflower customers, those with average daily total assets of 500,000 yuan or more, accounted for 2.49% of their retail customers, but contributed 81.9% of savings assets. In other words, 97% of depositors own less than 2% of savings assets. Therefore, this former advisor to the People's Bank of China suggested that the government should ensure that more than half of the economic stimulus funds are used to address the supply-demand imbalance, focusing on improving the social welfare of low-income groups. Furthermore, to effectively boost residents' consumption capacity, the basic pension payment standard covering rural residents and unemployed urban residents should be increased from the current 200 plus yuan per month to 1,000 yuan, meaning that the monthly pension for more than half of China's low-income population would increase from less than $30 to $150. It's rare to see advisors within the government system collectively and publicly criticize the government's current policies and call for giving money to ordinary people to stimulate consumption. This reflects the fact that deflationary pressure and insufficient domestic demand have become major challenges facing the Chinese economy. Faced with deflationary pressures, deleveraging by residents, and insufficient consumption, many countries have adopted measures such as directly distributing cash to households to increase disposable income and stimulate consumption to stabilize the economy. For example, after the bursting of its real estate bubble, Japan was mired in a prolonged period of low growth and deflation. As businesses and residents began reducing borrowing and cutting spending, the Japanese government repeatedly implemented subsidy measures to stimulate domestic demand. In 1999, Japan launched the Regional Revitalization Vouchers, distributing consumption vouchers to specific groups of residents to boost consumption by increasing purchasing power. During the 2009 global financial crisis, the Japanese government again provided cash subsidies to residents to alleviate income pressure caused by the economic downturn. During the 2020 pandemic, Japan distributed an additional 100,000 yen in cash to every resident to maintain consumer demand. The United States and Canada also adopted similar measures during the 2020 pandemic. Governments implemented multiple rounds of economic relief programs, directly distributing cash subsidies to residents while expanding the scope of unemployment benefits and family support. The reason for this is that when businesses' willingness to invest declines and consumer confidence is weak, simply lowering interest rates is insufficient to effectively stimulate demand. The government needs to directly improve residents' cash flow through fiscal transfers. These experts undoubtedly possess data that ordinary people cannot access. Even without this data, we can see that in today's China, a wave of unemployment is spreading across cities. Shops are closing or struggling, and ordinary families are tightening their belts, afraid to spend money. This year, business isn't about how hard you try. Even if you try your hardest, you won't make any money. Look at the streets, they're cleaner than dogs licked. The current situation in Guangzhou is something you might not believe. Some companies are already unable to pay salaries. Even more shockingly, some companies were still operating the day before, and by evening, people in group chats were saying the companies were dissolving and closing down. Now, it's not just many companies. Many shops on the street are also struggling to stay afloat. Many are for sale, but there's no one willing to take them over. Frankly speaking, many shop owners and entrepreneurs can't even afford the rent, let alone make a profit. In fact, very few shops are actually making money. Fellow hotelers, how many rooms did you open in June? Did it suddenly become the off-season? We have 23 rooms, and now we can only open 2 or 3 a day. A lot of rooms are empty. Business is extremely dismal, and I'm in charge of the entire operation. We've signed up for all the online promotions and lowered prices, but we still haven't got any bookings. In the past, raising a child might have been as simple as adding a pair of chopsticks, but now, I specifically checked Baidu, and a child with severe pneumonia can cost over $20,000 or 150,000 yuan for treatment. My friend's daughter went through this. He said she didn't even dare smoke for 2 years. Some say it's a matter of probability, but pneumonia is actually quite common in children. After hearing and reading this, I was completely stunned. It's like climbing a mountain with no end in sight. I don't even know if I can make it to the top, and I'm carrying 2 burdens, the unknown future and my child's future. I can afford to fall, but what about my child? How can it be solved? Does the CCP government know? Undoubtedly they do. CCP officials at all levels are adept at embellishing data to meet the CCP's demands, namely to promote a rosy economic outlook. However, even with such efforts as embellishment, the data released by the CCP still clearly shows the pain points in the economy. On July 9th, the National Bureau of Statistics of China released economic data for June of this year. The added value of industries above the designated size increased by 5.3% year-on-year. Total retail sales of consumer goods, or the Consumer Price Index (CPI), rose 1% year-on-year. This indicates that production supply remains relatively strong, but demand recovery is relatively slow. The inflated data also shows that the current economic situation is characterized by strong supply and weak demand, strong investment and weak consumption, and strong exports and weak domestic demand. Furthermore, data released by the CCP shows that in the second quarter of 2026, China's GDP deflator rebounded to 1.6%, ending 12 consecutive quarters of negative growth. The GDP deflator is a comprehensive indicator of changes in the overall economic price level, covering final demand components such as consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports. Imagine a country experiencing 12 quarters of negative growth. This indicates that price weakness is no longer limited to the industrial sector, but has spread throughout the entire economic system. In May of this year, China's total retail sales of consumer goods fell by 0.6% year-on-year, marking the first monthly year-on-year negative growth since the COVID-19 pandemic in 2022. The categories that dragged down the market most significantly were automobile retail sales, down 16.1% year-on-year, household appliances and audiovisual equipment, down 15.6%, building and decoration materials, down 13.6%, gold and silver jewelry, down 8.9%, furniture, down 8.7%, and sports and entertainment goods, down 8%. The most significant declines were almost entirely in durable goods and upgrade-oriented consumption rather than daily necessities. This indicates that the current weak consumption is not a short-term seasonal fluctuation, but rather the result of weakening income expectations, the wealth effect, and consumer confidence. The double-digit or near double-digit declines in these categories suggest that residents are actively reducing large expenditures in upgrade-oriented consumption. This is already a clear sign of deflation. Deflation refers to a sustained decline in the overall price level over a period of time, usually exceeding 6 months, accompanied by credit contraction and sluggish consumption. It is creating a vicious cycle of insufficient demand, falling prices, reduced income, further decline in demand. The core solution to deflation is not expanding supply, but improving household balance sheets and consumption capacity. Official data shows that people are not only not borrowing money, but are also saving money aggressively and repaying loans early. In April of this year, household loans decreased by 786.9 billion yuan in a single month, hitting a new low since statistics began, indicating that the household sector as a whole is actively deleveraging. At the same time, residents' propensity to save has increased significantly, with per capita savings of approximately 118,000 yuan, more than doubling over 10 years. In other words, the Chinese Communist Party government understands better than ordinary citizens the challenges the country faces: weak consumption, deflationary pressures, and an imbalance between supply and demand. To break this deadlock, it's necessary to improve income distribution, strengthen the social security system, and redistribute wealth. Compared to other countries that directly support households through fiscal transfers during economic downturns, what is the CCP's attitude? In May 2022, party leader Xi Jinping published an article in the party journal Qiyuxi stating that the welfare system cannot be adopted. The article warns that high welfare spending fosters a group of lazy people and those who don't work, placing a heavy burden on national finances and leading to the middle income trap. Subsequently, meetings of the Politburo of the CPC Central Committee, executive meetings of the State Council, and related documents have repeatedly emphasized the need to prevent high welfare spending from fostering laziness. In other words, the CPC's reason for not wanting to give money to the people to stimulate consumption is that it will foster laziness. In fact, the welfare of ordinary Chinese people is far too low. China's fiscal expenditure for social security funds such as old age care, medical care, unemployment, work-related injuries, maternity, and social assistance is only about 8% of GDP, which is significantly low. It's worth noting that China has a large bureaucratic population who are the primary beneficiaries of this 8% of resources. In vast rural areas, a generation of migrant workers who made enormous contributions to urbanization is aging, and their pensions amount to less than $15 per month. According to Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development statistics, most developed countries globally have consistently maintained social security expenditures above 20% of GDP, averaging around 20 to 25%, with some Nordic countries exceeding 25%. Even in developing countries with similar per capita incomes to China, such as Brazil, South Africa, and Thailand, social security expenditures account for over 15% of GDP. The Chinese people are not lazy either. According to data released by China's National Bureau of Statistics in May 2026, on the National Urban Surveyed Unemployment Rate and employment-related indicators, the average weekly working hours for employed individuals are 48.2 hours, remaining stable in the 47 to 49-hour range for many years. How can a group of people working nearly 50 hours a week be called lazy? China's structural income imbalance is a fundamental driver of deflationary pressures. To improve income distribution and substantially increase residents' disposable income, it's necessary to inject a portion of state-owned assets such as shares in state-owned listed companies into the Social Security Fund to increase pensions, reimbursement rates, and social assistance. Additionally, it's necessary to increase the share of residents' income in national income. In other words, to significantly increase people's income, some resources previously concentrated in the hands of the state-owned sector government must be transferred to the household sector. However, distributing money to the people constitutes a certain degree of wealth redistribution, involving adjustments to the interests of various parties. This fundamentally conflicts with the CCP's existing power and resource allocation structure. State-owned enterprises are the material foundation and control tool of the CCP's rule. They are not only economic resources, but also important carriers of political control and interest distribution. Under the current system, revenue from state-owned assets is mainly used for fiscal purposes, the expansion of state-owned enterprises, and the maintenance of the official system. If this revenue is redistributed to ordinary people, it will inevitably affect vested interest groups at various levels. In other words, in China, wealth redistribution is essentially a reallocation of power. The CCP views state-owned assets as one of the foundations of its rule, and a large-scale transfer of these assets would be seen as a political challenge to its power, which is unacceptable. This is why the CCP is so reluctant to significantly increase ordinary people's income to stimulate the economy. All of the CCP's efforts and goals have never been about improving people's lives, but rather about maintaining the basic operation of the state apparatus. Therefore, China's current economic situation is an unsolvable problem. Many ordinary Chinese people are unaware of this and remain perplexed. Did everyone notice how unusually quiet this year's Dragon Boat Festival was? It shouldn't be like this, since this holiday season has 4 major drawbacks. First, there's a 618 e-commerce festival. Second, there's a traditional Dragon Boat Festival. Third, there's Father's Day in the West. Fourth, it's just a normal Saturday and Sunday. The blogger says that both online e-commerce and offline businesses experienced an unusually quiet Dragon Boat Festival this year, with almost no festive activity. The entire market was unusually quiet, almost indistinguishable from any other day. This year's Dragon Boat Festival sales figures left me a bit bewildered. My Wulong store is 110 square meters with employees. Last year, our daily sales during the Dragon Boat Festival were between 18 and 20,000 yuan. This year, the data for the 3-day holiday wasn't even as good as usual. After discovering this, I immediately contacted the staff at Meituan's back end. Because we're quite familiar with each other, they told me that this wasn't an isolated incident, it was a common phenomenon. I also noticed the change clearly in the discussions in my industry peer group. The lady said that everyone in the group was discussing what happened to the business this year and why sales had declined so drastically. Chongqing Wulong is a tourist city heavily reliant on tourists. Logically, there should be many tourists during the Dragon Boat Festival holiday. But this year, it was unlike any previous year. Everyone discussed it back and forth, but they still couldn't find a clear answer. That's all for today. If you enjoy our content, please give us a thumbs up, subscribe, leave a comment, or share it with a friend. We appreciate your support, and we'll see you next time.